That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Sauna, the directorial debut of Mathias Broe, which premieres on January 27th, 2025 at the Sundance Film Festival in the World Cinema Dramatic Competition.
Directorial debut.
Has directed several shorts, maybe music videos, etc.
What is Sauna about? Johan, a gay man in Copenhagen, revels in nightlife until meeting William, a transgender man. Their profound love challenges societal norms surrounding gender, identity, and relationships. What's your pull quote?
I don't believe that the film does that.
No.
For them.
But, someone else probably wrote that premise.
Maybe that was the intention, yeah. But puppy love becomes rotten in the state of Denmark with Sauna, a familiar narrative in the annals of LGBTQ cinema, utilizing a trans quotient to examine what seems the eternal, inescapable trial for the queer community to find love in a hopeless place.
Mine. Sauna left me lukewarm as it navigates a familiar LGBTQ narrative. Yeah, you've seen this story many times before.
Yes, except it's dealing, with...
but replace one of the cis gay men with a trans gay man.
Or black gay men, or like it seems like we've always had intersectionality in the LGBTQ plus community, but like this, to me, I wish it had been a little stronger based on how far we've come, but...
The story's pretty simple. Johan is this guy who moved from a small town to Copenhagen. So now he's a big city gay.
Played by Magnus, Juhl, Andersen.
And he works at a sauna, which is basically like a bathhouse.
Called Adonis.
Like a gay sex club. And he one day hooks up with this guy named William.
Played by Terese Rask.
Who's a trans man. And it seems like Johan has not experienced something like this before. So it's not really it's a very minor bump in the road.
Yeah.
Like within the same night, he's like, well, actually, I would like to get to know you. Do you want to continue hooking up? They do. And then their fondness for one another grows very quickly. There's an incident that kind of separates them, which is also kind of minor, the way it plays out. But William tells Johan, I'm trying to save up money for my top surgery. And Johan's dumbass steals money from work, gets fired, doesn't tell William. And then we flash forward like a month, which coincides with, because he gets fired from his job, and one of his coworkers who got him the job, he actually lives with him. And the coworker / roommate says, well, I'll give you 30 days to move out. So we see 30 days later that William has gotten the top surgery, but didn't really need money because William's parents are rich. So Johan stole this money for no reason. But Johan starts living with William and becoming more involved in William's life and his specific community of other like trans, non-binary people. William feels out of place. And then everything comes to a head when we hear about this party that finally happens, and it's supposed to celebrate another trans guy's 2 years on T. Johan shows up, and clearly he's kind of like a visitor who doesn't maybe know how to behave.
He's a guest, yes, to the community.
He gets drunk and starts talking too much. William asks him to leave, and so effectively they kind of break up.
Yeah.
And in a last-ditch effort to stay with William, because William's character has a hard time getting testosterone, which we can talk about. But Johan breaks into a pharmacy, steals a bunch of testosterone gel, leaves it at William's front door. The end.
Yeah. And I think I do like, to start on a positive note, the bookended imagery.
The film starts with Johan at his job, the sex club, looking through a glory hole.
And we see his eye.
Yeah. We see his eye, and then the end of the film is Johan having left the testosterone gel at William's front door and then looking through the peephole. I like the cinematography. I like the two main actors.
Nicolai Lok was the cinematographer, and yes, Magnus, Juhl, Andersen, and Terese Rask.
There's nothing wrong with the story.
No, and there are lots of interesting things about it. It's just that as a queer person, I've seen variations of this over and over again throughout the decades of cinema. But it does have some nice moments. I think it's missing an edge on the characterization of Johan, who the perspective this is from, which I find an interesting approach, especially utilizing the trans storyline as kind of tangential. But for such a frustrating character, I feel like there was a way to make us feel a little bit more empathetic for him, because he's kind of a victim of his own making.
So I'll be honest, I chose this film to watch because I saw the poster, which was two men, and then it said sauna. So I'm like, oh, it's gay shit.
I also think that the title is misleading.
So yeah, so that's my first issue. I think that this sauna, this gay sex club bathhouse, is kind of downplayed when it really is such a big part of Johan's life, because we get some understanding of his life before he moved to Copenhagen, which is that his parents are conservative and not really accepting of his sexuality, that he comes from a small town. Apparently there's only one gay bar, and it's kind of sad. So him moving to the big city is exciting for him as a gay man.
Notably, his mother knows he's gay, his father does not.
He works at the bathhouse, but he also partakes.
He spends a lot of free time there.
So he's having a lot of sex. We see that he uses an app. I mean, I think it is supposed to be Grindr, and he hooks up with people, but he also seems quite lonely. Mm-hmm.
And his friends seem to be ostensibly the only friends we see are his coworkers.
Well, his main friend is his coworker, not the one who he lives with, because the coworker who he lives with is like more than twice his age. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was expecting the sauna, this location, to be a much bigger part of his life, and it really gets downplayed. And I think that was the first misstep. The second misstep is, from my perspective, is that because it does feel very familiar, this narrative, what could have made it feel more fresh is us looking at it from the perspective of William and how this community within the umbrella. It's interesting that William, as a trans man, feels more stable than...
Has a greater sense of community, resources, while Johan is somebody that's kind of become invisible.
Right.
But again, like I said, I think that's partly his own fault.
And while that's apparent, I think to put a fresh spin on it, we could have focused more on William. Because his parents know he's trans, they support him, they paid for his top surgery. We also understand that William is like in some sort of academic program. He lives in a dorm, mm-hmm. but he's on sabbatical because he wants to focus on his transition. William has a certain level of privilege, right, that Johan does not. And I think that would have been interesting.
It is interesting, but I think taking a step back from these characters, it's also a film about space, holding space, about intersections in our community, if indeed we can still argue that there is a cohesive sense of community, but both where spaces are held to a certain level of exclusivity because out of ignorance, such as the Adonis gay bar, which you can get, or sauna, which you can get into, or William's kind of trans community and resources, which is exclusive out of a need for self-protection. And how both of those, whatever our reasons are, it's really closing us off and making others invisible to us within a community that we share intersectionality with.
Something else I thought would have been interesting or even important to focus on is the first time, like that first meeting, Johan and William, them being sexual and Johan being so like, he miscalculated this situation, because we see that Johan is a bottom. We see him prepping to bottom before this date with William. And so when William shows up and Johan realizes he's trans and, doesn't have a penis, it would seem like that's his reaction. It's sort of like, William says, well, maybe I should go. Mm-hmm. And Johan says, no, don't. I would like to get to know you. Can we kiss? And then they do, and then everything's great.
Well, William says, you didn't read my profile. And when you say miscalculation, Johan does that over and over again.
So I think it's curious that the film didn't spend more time. I think there could be an entire 90-minute feature about that first encounter and all the things, like a character study on like what that means about specifically Johan's identity as like a cis gay man who seems like he prefers penetrative sex to then interact with someone who would not be able to provide him with that sort of naturally. It, like in this specific scenario, there's no, we really only get the sense that he prefers that with William because later on in the film, William buys, I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but William buys like a strap-on so that he can peg Johan. And then we see them do that. But it's very curious that this film didn't go there more.
Sure. Or at least maybe articulate in a better way how I think in the community there's a lot of non-consensual sex, but a lot of people that are participating in that may be looking for something more, and how maybe when we're looking to utilize only certain parts, body parts of people, that's really limiting us, because if we are really looking for an emotional connection, we realize the genitalia might not matter at all.
Another big plot point is William, within Copenhagen, there's the gender identity clinic, and that's where he needs to go to get on hormones. And the film, I don't think, does a very good job of explaining how the transition process works. I was confused that William was able to get top surgery but can't get hormones.
I think that he would have been, my understanding, and again, I don't think the film articulates that very well, but my understanding was that he would have been able to do both through the same program, but it would take much longer, and he circumvented that. Really, he jumped the gun getting the top surgery without being approved to receive hormones.
But then his character is saying, like, they're not going to give me hormones because they have a hard time understanding that a trans man can also be gay. And then the film just kind of glosses over that. And I think that topic could also be an entire movie. And then we reviewed a movie from last year's Sundance called
Desire Lines, which was in the next program, which I did not care for.
Which is kind of similar in that its setting is in a bathhouse for part of it. Another part of it, it's like half narrative feature, half documentary. The documentary portion, most of it focuses on trans activists from the late 70s, early 80s, who also found it hard to get medical treatment or validation because he was a trans man who identified as gay. So I find it really interesting that this film just kind of glosses over that.
But I think that's also because we're focusing on Johan, who doesn't even know how to ask the kind of questions that he needs to of William. Like when William says that they have a hard time, they don't want to accept me into the program because I also identify as gay. Like there's no follow-up. William instead chastises Johan for treating it like it's not a very big deal. Like you're fine, you're beautiful no matter what, he's telling him. And
I did think that scene worked well and how someone like him would fumble through this situation.
It did, but it also is fitting as a character study of this person that is set adrift, has no vision for himself, is not trying to get another job. In fact, realizing he needs to find money, he instead takes a note from his ex-coworker on doing sex work to do so.
Which was an odd scene because, his co-worker, the one he doesn't live with, says many times, I need a sugar daddy. I like expensive things. So then, Johan gets on some
daddy app or something.
Yeah, some sugar daddy app. Daddy hunt. And he finds this man. The man says, yep, come in. The money's on the table. We don't see them do anything. And then we see him on the next day and there's no mention of what happened. I found that curious. But another scene that I thought could have been handled differently is when Johan tells William, I work at the sauna. And William's kind of shocked. Johan says, you've never been there? No. Well, let's go. And William says, are you sure it's okay for me, like someone like me, to be there? Yeah, sure, it's fine. And I just thought that was such an odd scene because they get there and we had already learned that William is sensitive about his chest. Like he doesn't want his chest to be touched.
He's binding.
Because he's binding, because he still has breasts. And they get there and the owner of the sauna is the one who checks them in.
Rolf.
And he lets them in. He gives them 2 locker keys and they go in. And William is clearly uncomfortable because Johan immediately gets naked and puts on the towel. But we can see that William is trying to discreetly sort of take off his pants while leaving the towel on. He doesn't want to take off his shirt. So we see his binding top and then he puts his shirt back on. So now they're walking through the sauna with William in a shirt. And then they start having sex in like a closet when the boss comes in and starts screaming like, this is a club for men who want to have sex with men. You can't have her here. I don't care what you do in your private life, but don't bring it here. Get her out of here.
Which is really uncalled for. Like at this point,
it is.
At this point, they're in a closed off space. No one else can even see them.
Well, so that part also, how did you clock William? Like you let William in. So what clued you in? Because he was wearing a shirt. But then I also felt a little frustrated because for anyone who's been in spaces like this, you know, pretty quickly, if you're not following the rules, someone will tell you like, hey, you can't just walk around with your clothes on. Mm-hmm. So I found it curious that Johan, who works there, thought that this would be okay or didn't prep William. Or...
Well, I think it speaks to how oblivious Johan is about everything.
So then that leads me to my next point, which is I think the main thing I got from this story, it really focuses on Johan and how clueless he is.
As a lot of 20-somethings are, though, even thinking back to myself at that age. Like, you don't know, you aren't thinking that way. And
which is, right, which is what makes this feel so familiar. It just, like, there's nothing new about it. It just...
And I think what you have is two people that have found something that they both are in need of, but mistaking it for something more and their own kind of development, their own identity development, because Johan also strikes me as somebody that hasn't figured out who he is at all either, and hasn't been allowed to, and is looking for love in all the wrong places. And like a lot of us might do, especially that age, you know, getting the low-hanging fruit. He's a handsome young man, and he is getting his needs met based solely on that. But what happens when you are placed in any other environment where that is not going to work for you?
After William effectively gets kicked out of the sauna, we presume that it's William who spray paints on the sauna wall, like outside, F-U-C-K, the system, and system is spelled C-I-S. Mm-hmm. So then a little later, when the scene you already mentioned where William's upset that the gender identity clinic won't give him testosterone, then Johan has the bright idea to spray paint the gender identity clinic and then tells William, and William gets upset like, hello, stupid. If they don't want to help me now or before, they damn sure don't want to help me now because they're going to think I'm this volatile person. Uh-huh. So then Johan has already gotten fired for stealing, trying to help William buy some surgery that he didn't really need the money for. Mm-hmm. Then he spray paints his clinic. Then the scene where he breaks into the pharmacy.
Oh my. Well, at this point, they've already broken up. William said, be out of my apartment by tonight.
And we see him walking down the street, but then you see a brick in his hand. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is he going to do? Breaks the window. Immediately the alarm goes off. And then he's rummaging around with his like cell phone light, trying to find testosterone. It was a tense scene. And then we hear emergency vehicles coming. He's obviously able to get away long enough to drop off the testosterone. But, you know, in the end, it's like the trajectory for this character, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, except that I don't think... Well, he seems lost.
He seems lost. He seems just as lost at the... I don't know how much he's learned about himself, but I don't mind that kind of frustration. I don't think it needs to have a pat resolution. What I like about, again, like those bookended visual moments is that each time he's an outsider peering into someone else's life and not really being an active member in his own experience, and which makes him kind of depressing, even though there's some hope. Like it's very hopeful that kind of awkward fumbling he had, that first sexual encounter with William. Like this is how, although he was stupidly not reading the profile of this person correctly, he's still open. He still wants to have a human experience with this person, and so there's a hopeful component to it. And at that point in the film, I'm hoping it was going to be something like My Beautiful Laundrette, for instance, have that kind of a... But it kind of spins its wheels a bit, again, much like people do, though.
I don't feel hopeful for Johan. I think he made a lot of stupid decisions. He seems hapless. Also, I didn't mention, after he and William break up, after the party, Tay's tea party, and William asks Johan to leave, Johan is drunk and on his bike. And where does he go? The sauna, which he has been banned from.
Is there, again, it's Copenhagen. That can't be the only sauna.
Oh, maybe. Well, I assumed it was the same one, but either way, he ends up at a bathhouse. Mm-hmm. And then he's drunk and he ends up
He gets in a sling.
And lets several men, I'm trying to choose my words carefully.
Rail?
They run a train on his ass. And, I think that behavior, coupled with the drinking, coupled with the poor decision making, the stealing, the vandalism.
But that felt very real for someone like
I don't know. That seems excessive.
I don't know.
I know a lot of people. There ain't nobody done all that, like, in that short amount of time. I think that he's going to
when you feel desperate,
decline further.
Nothing to lose. Maybe. At the point where he smashed into the pharmacy, what did I say? Like, this man needs to hit rock bottom.
That's what I'm saying.
He needs a bottom moment.
And so I don't mind that. I don't like that it wraps up nicely.
Yeah.
It just is doing a lot. And I think maybe had it pulled out a couple of plot points and focused on, again, I think it should have focused on the sauna being the centerpiece of the story and all the things that are happening and all the characters that run through. And
I would have liked a scene or at least a phone conversation with Johan's family, because I think that would help us also navigate how he's feeling at Tay's tea party, where you see him drinking to excess, and you know what's going to happen. He's going to make a fool of himself, and he does. But I think it's interesting for this character who is, a success or finds sexual success at the bathhouse as a handsome young man, when, as I said earlier, can't depend on that in this space of people that are like but not like him, how he's completely feeling ignored. And I think how that relates to maybe his attachment development to his parents. I think there's more of a complete picture we could have gotten from him to make him more understandable.
What would you give Sauna?
I would give the one scene I think we also should talk about briefly is Johan tells William about his first orgasm.
Yeah, or no, William asks him when did he know he was gay?
Yes.
And he said, whatever, high school, junior high, he had a best friend he fell in love with, and they went to a lake, and Johan was so aroused by his friend that he went and hid behind a rock and masturbated into the water, and then the fish were eating his semen.
And he liked that because he felt like he was at one with everything.
So then at the end of
and William says, if I would have seen you do that, I would have joined you.
But then
during the railing at the end, we see his mind go to that moment, that transformative moment for him, and William is a part of it and does not join him in the water.
Yeah.
Which I think was kind of one of the film's more powerful visuals.
Yeah, by itself it feels more powerful. But yeah, what would you give Sauna?
2.5.
I think it's fine. I would give it 2.5 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.